Hello and welcome to Reportage. I am Danish bin Nabi. In today's segment of Reportage, I shall have a discussion about the credibility of the Indian media and the challenges media industry is facing. To discuss about this issue, I have with me senior journalist and author, Mr. Karan Thapar. Mr. Thapar, welcome to Reportage. Mr. Thapar, let me begin by asking you, the way reporting is done, be it electronic media or the print media across the country, how credible the reporting is these days?
Look, I don't think you can give one answer that applies to all television channels and to all newspapers or all magazines. Different magazines get a different response. Some newspapers, like the Indian Express and the Hindu, are credible. They are critical of the government. They're honest. They do their own reporting. They don't rely on government handouts. They also take up stories that haven't appeared in the news in other papers and explore them. So I would give them very high marks. That is also largely true of NDTV. Most of the time, its discussions are intelligent. Most of the time, it has good guests. It asks the right questions. Sometimes NDTV does fall from its own high standards, but that is only occasionally. I'm afraid that is not true of many other channels. It's not true of many other newspapers. The two channels in particular that I believe are shameful, and I use that word deliberately, would be Times Now and Republic. But there are also several Hindi channels that feel like propaganda outfits that exist to popularize the government rather than to credibly report. And sadly, that is often true of a couple of newspapers as well. So when you ask that question, the answer really depends upon which newspaper and which channel you're talking about.
Mr. Thapar, according to World Press Freedom Index, India has slipped to 142nd position. That's way behind Afghanistan, which stands at 122, and South Sudan, which stands at 138. How worrying is this trend?
Well, look, the fact that we are behind Afghanistan and Sudan won't please anyone. But I have to tell you that I have no doubt in my mind that overall the Indian media is a lot more free. And when I say a lot more, by orders of magnitude than the media in Afghanistan or Sudan. So I don't know how these rankings are done. I'm not questioning them. I'm not criticizing them. I'm certainly not undermining them. But I am pointing out that although the ranking and the fact that we are demoted below Afghanistan and Sudan is disturbing, distressing, and a matter of concern, nonetheless, I do believe that our media is a more critical media. We have channels and newspapers that would compete with the best in the world a lot of the time, maybe not all the time. And I don't think that's necessarily true of either of these two other countries.
Mr. Thapar, the way media is reporting, especially the prime time shows which we have on each day, each night, I must say, has that taken away the critical thinking away? Has that taken the critical thinking away from the people?
Well, look, I don't know whether it's taken critical thinking away from the people, because I don't think I judge the Indian public by those who watch primetime shows on television. Even if those primetime shows have very large audiences, it's a mere fraction of the country's population. And I don't think you can say that the country's thinking is determined by the discussion on those programs. However, I think many of those programs are pretty awful, really pretty awful. I don't think the anchor does a fair job in either soliciting information or inquiring into people's positions. Leave aside balance and fairness. Those are qualities that often anchors don't even seem to understand. I don't think the guests are chosen because they're representative of different viewpoints. More importantly, I think guests are chosen because they are very good at aggressive replies, which will, it's thought, encourage audiences to watch. It's a spectacle or a tamasha that's being staged rather than an inquiry into the substance of current affairs. Our primetime discussions generate heat. They don't shed light, which is why I find them disappointing.
And how disappointed are you by the Hindi primetime shows, barring few?
I don't watch them, so I really can't comment on that.
And what about the print media? We are unable to see that print media, especially the mainstream media, apart from Quaint Wire or the First Post, the print media, we don't see the quality journalism they do these days. If we talk of the mainstream print media.
I don't think, Danish, it's true to brand and label all of the print media with the same brush. As I said in answer to an earlier question, There's an awful lot in the Hindu and the Express that I think is very valuable. I think on specific issues, the Hindustan Times is a very rewarding paper, particularly on COVID and the depth of reportage on COVID, but also the articles written by Roshan Kishore analyzing the economy and the impact of economic reforms or the agricultural laws on different sections of society. Those are very good in-depth articles. They require concentration. They're not necessarily always easy to read, but nonetheless, they're very rewarding. There are other newspapers that are a lot less rewarding. So I come back to what I said earlier. I don't think you can brand the media, be it newspapers or be it television, with one single color, with one simple stroke. I think you need to differentiate between them, and I think you need to appreciate that there are some good papers and some bad ones, and even within the good papers, there are some good things they do, and on other issues and subjects, their coverage is less meritorious.
Mr. Thapar, how can media houses set themselves free from the influence of the ruling dispensation?
Well, I think it's not a simple process of doing just one thing. You need to, first of all, secure your financial independence. In other words, you need to be able to survive without government advertising. And remember, I think I'm right in saying the single biggest element of advertising available to the media is the government, which is why, whether it's newspapers or channels, they are so loath to annoy the government because of the threat that they will lose the advertising that keeps them going. So the first thing is to secure, to the extent you can, your financial independence. The second is to ensure that proprietors give editors the freedom and the editorial control to determine the editorial content as well as the editorial line that the paper will take. The problem is many proprietors have other business interests, and they're scared that if their paper annoys the government, then the impact and the retribution will come in terms of their other interests. And so they secure the rest of their industrial empire at the cost of the balance and independence of their newspaper entity. That has to end. Thirdly, I think you do need credible, thoughtful, well-educated journalists who are paid well, and that's very important, because just as much as education ensures that a journalist is balanced, he's thoughtful, he or she writes well, all of which improves the quality of journalism. If you pay them well, they become less vulnerable to being bought over by lollipops or bribes or gestures from the other side. So, just as it applies to newspapers, so it does apply to journalists. Pay them well, and you will ensure that they are less corruptible.
Mr. Thapar, I must ask you this question. Do you think the media was more freer during UPA's time than it's presently now?
I think the media remains and retains the capacity to be as free now as it was then, but I think the extent to which the media has succumbed, sometimes willingly and voluntarily, without putting up a fight, to resistance is greater. I think even in the UPA days, and this is true of all governments, not just in India, but all over the world, let's be honest, they do try and influence the media. They do try and ensure that the media covers their issues, their problems more sympathetically. It is the job of editors and journalists and hopefully proprietors to stand up and resist. That capacity to stand up and resist has diminished a lot more now than it had earlier. But yes, I suspect pressure from the government has also grown. Both things have happened simultaneously.
But why have journalists, editors given up? Why don't they put up a fight?
I think you have to ask them that question. I can only answer indirectly. But I think it's because of pressure that is brought to bear in terms of the three things I mentioned earlier: commercial independence, proprietors who want to retain their business interests elsewhere, but also the type of people who are chosen to be editors are often deliberately selected by proprietors because they think they will be more willing either to toe the proprietor's line or to accept the phone calls that they get from government offices not to do this or to do that. Such people are chosen deliberately, partly because it's easier to handle them and partly because they'll get on with the government and therefore diminish the problems of the government.
BJP politicians, BJP people allied with BJP have stopped coming to your shows since 2017. Rao Madhav was the last politician you had on your show. Is the boycott still continuing? The BJP boycott still continuing?
Absolutely. There is not a single member of the BJP, MP, MLA, minister who's willing to come. And let me be honest, that is also true of people who are not politicians, but senior executives who clearly take their line from the government. So for the last 1 year, I have tried multiple times, I think 15, 20, maybe 25 times, and I'm not exaggerating, it may be even more than 25 times, to get interviews from people like Mr. Paul, Professor Balram Bhargav, Professor Vijay Raghavan, and all of them have repeatedly said that they will do it. They've often said, just give me a bit more time. But over a year and a quarter has gone by and they haven't been able to find the time, and yet they're giving interviews to other TV channels all the time. And it can only be because they have been told by the government, do not give an interview. And that applies to many other people who are connected with the government. It applies, frankly, I'll be honest, to Vivek Debroy, who is head of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. It applies to Rajiv Kumar, who's head of Niti. These people have even very sweetly said to me that we need to get permission and it's not given. And I'm being upfront and open because I see no reason why I should lie. I think the truth should be known. It's not just that MPs, ministers, politicians are unwilling to come because they think of me as an opponent of the BJP and someone that the BJP doesn't want to help in any way. But even senior people who work under the BJP, like at Niti Aayog, like at the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, like in the Health Ministry, are unwilling to talk. That is a fact of the matter. And
all these things have happened since that infamous interview of 2007.
Look, I don't think they've all happened since that interview, although it is undeniable that they've happened after the interview. But remember, the interview happened in 2007. Mr. Modi came to power in 2014, and right up till 2017, for the first 3 years of his government, I had no problem with ministers coming to give interviews. They did so willingly, they did so repeatedly, and they did so very generously. So the Venkaiah Naidu's when he was a minister, Arun Jaitley when he was alive, Nirmala Sitharaman, Piyush Goyal, Ravi Shankar Prasad, and a whole host of others, including Ram Madhav, were repeatedly on my show, and quite happy to be so. But something happened in 2017, and they first began cancelling acceptances that they had given, and then they just began refusing. In fact, Prakash Javadekar, who was one of the last to back out of an interview, even said to me, मुझे मेरे अध्यक्ष से कहा गया कि तुमको इंटरव्यू नहीं देना, तो पता करो कारण प्रॉब्लम क्या है, अध्यक्ष जी से पता तो करो, हमें क्यों कहा जा रहा है कि तुम्हें इंटरव्यू नहीं देना. He openly said so. He won't deny it.
And what does he mean by Adhyaksh? Was it Amit Shah or Prime Minister himself?
It was Amit Shah, because Amit Shah at the time was president of the BJP. I'm talking about something that would have happened late 2016, maybe January 2017. And by the way,
and you even reached out to the Home Minister Amit Shah.
Let me finish this. Everything that I'm telling you about Prakash Javadekar, about Arun Jaitley, about any of the other ministers, about Ram Madhav, it's all in my book, Devil's Advocate. There is a long chapter at the end where all of this is there. It's been there since the book was published in 2018. That's almost 3 years ago. It will be 3 years in July. No one has refuted it, leave aside, disputed it.
Mr. Karan Thapar, I think we shall end this discussion on this very note. Thank you very much for coming to my show. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh.
Please subscribe to our channel Reportage and press the bell icon to remain updated.